They tossed me out into the freezing storm like trash, completely blind to royal jets rushing to save me.
I stood shivering on the slick, unforgiving gravel driveway of the Kensington estate, the torrential Boston rain soaking straight through my thin thrift store dress. Behind me, the heavy mahogany doors of the mansion slammed shut, the metallic click of the deadbolt sounding like a gunshot over the roar of the storm. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood on the other side of the glass foyer, flanked by her high society friends, her face contorted in a mask of victorious cruelty. She had just publicly humiliated me, calling me a worthless, gold-digging nobody who would never belong in their pristine, elite world. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was just Alara, the quiet, penniless librarian her son had made the mistake of bringing home. She had absolutely no idea who she had just locked out in the cold, and as the thunder cracked overhead, it was suddenly drowned out by a sound that made the ground tremble. The deafening roar of a fleet of royal jets descending into the private airspace, bringing an entire empire to my rescue. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where my listeners are tuning in from. To understand how I ended up standing in the freezing rain, stripped of my dignity in front of Boston's most elite families, you have to understand the lie I was living. And more importantly, you have to understand why I was living it. My name is Alara. At least, that was the only name I gave to the people in my life for 3 years. To my coworkers at the Rare Books Library in downtown Boston, I was just a quiet, diligent girl who wore oversized sweaters, brought a packed lunch every day, and spent her weekends meticulously restoring water-damaged manuscripts. I took the subway. I lived in a tiny, fourth-floor walk-up apartment where the radiator clanked all winter and the windows rattled whenever the wind blew off the harbor. I budgeted my groceries. I saved up for months to buy a decent pair of winter boots. To the world, I was utterly, beautifully ordinary. But beneath that carefully constructed facade of a humble, working-class life, I was hiding a secret so massive it dictated every breath I took. I was not just Alara. I was Her Royal Highness, Princess Alara Celestine of the House of Laurent, the firstborn daughter and direct heir to the throne of Valoria, a small, fiercely independent, and astonishingly wealthy sovereign principality nestled in the mountains of Western Europe. I had spent the first 22 years of my life inside a gilded cage. From the moment I could walk, my life was heavily orchestrated by an army of handlers, advisors, and security personnel. Every word I spoke was recorded by the press. Every outfit I wore was analyzed for diplomatic subtext. I was not a person. I was a symbol, an asset to the crown. The breaking point had come when I was 22, shortly after my mother, the Queen, passed away. She was the only person in the palace who saw me as a daughter, rather than a diplomatic chess piece. When she died, the warmth drained out of the royal court, leaving behind only the cold, calculating machinery of the monarchy. My father, the king, paralyzed by his own grief, immediately began arranging a politically advantageous marriage for me with a foreign duke I had met exactly twice. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't survive in that world without her. So, I did the unthinkable. I struck a deal with my father. I asked for 3 years. 3 years of total anonymity, completely separated from the crown, the money, and the titles. I wanted to know what it felt like to be a normal human being. I wanted to know if I had any worth outside of the blood in my veins and the crown on my head. Reluctantly, he agreed, under the condition that I take a new identity and that a single plainclothes royal guard would live in the apartment across the street from me, just in case. And so, I fled to Boston. I became ordinary. And that is where I met Julian Kensington. If you love stories about hidden identities, satisfying revenge, and dramatic reveals, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. Julian was the heir to the Kensington real estate empire. His family was old money, or at least they desperately pretended to be. They had amassed a fortune over 3 generations, but they still suffered from the agonizing insecurity that they weren't quite elite enough. When Julian first walked into my library looking for a first edition book for his father's birthday, I was charmed. He was handsome, charismatic, and seemed entirely fascinated by me. He didn't know about the palace, he didn't know about the Swiss bank accounts or the ancestral estates. He just saw Ilara in her dusty cardigan with ink smudges on her fingers. For the first year, it was a fairy tale. He took me to quiet coffee shops, we walked through the public gardens. He told me he loved my mind and my gentle spirit. I thought, naively, that I had found exactly what I was looking for, a man who loved me simply for me. But the illusion shattered the moment he introduced me to his family. The Kensingtons lived in a sprawling, ostentatious estate overlooking the water. From the second I walked through their towering front doors, Julian's mother, Eleanor, made her disdain terrifyingly clear. Eleanor Kensington was a woman whose entire existence revolved around social leverage. She judged a person's worth entirely by the labels on their clothes, the zip code of their childhood home, and the net worth of their parents. When Julian introduced me, a librarian with no pedigree, no trust fund, and no connections, I watched the polite smile freeze on Eleanor's face. Her eyes raked over my simple, off-the-rack dress, categorizing me instantly as a threat, a parasite, a disease. Over the next 2 years, as Julian and I got engaged, Eleanor launched a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break my spirit and drive me away. She would accidentally leave me off the guest list for family dinners, forcing me to wait in the kitchen while the family ate. She would give me humiliating gifts in front of her friends, like a self-help book on how to dress for success, or a gift card to a discount department store, loudly proclaiming, "I know how you girls struggle to make ends meet." And Julian? Julian did nothing. The man who had seemed so independent and strong in the safety of the library turned into a spineless coward in the presence of his mother's wealth. Whenever Eleanor insulted me, Julian would look away, stare at his shoes, or whisper to me later, "Just ignore her, Ilara. You know how she is. Don't make a scene. She controls my trust fund." I endured it. I endured it because my core trait, something instilled in me since childhood by royal tutors, was dignified composure under pressure. A princess does not scream. A princess does not throw tantrums. A princess absorbs the blows with a steady gaze and an unbroken spine. I believed that by enduring her cruelty with grace, I was proving my authentic worth. I believed Julian would eventually stand up for me. I was wrong. I was only enabling her cruelty. The only saving grace in that suffocating house was Julian's older brother, Arthur. Have you ever been excluded or judged by someone who thought they were better than you? Tell me about your experience in the comments. Let's support each other. Arthur was the black sheep of the Kensington family. Unlike Julian, who lived entirely off the family wealth, Arthur had rejected the family business to become an architect. He worked with his hands. He built things. He had a quiet, grounded strength that made Eleanor deeply uncomfortable, which was why she rarely spoke of him. From the very beginning, Arthur saw through the facade of the Kensington wealth, and more importantly, he saw me. I remember a Sunday dinner where Eleanor had purposefully seated me at the very end of the table, near the swinging kitchen doors, serving me a different, cheaper wine than the rest of the guests. As the table engaged in a loud conversation about their winter trips to Aspen, Arthur had quietly picked up his plate, walked down the length of the long dining table, and sat right next to me. He didn't make a big, dramatic speech. He just poured himself a glass of the cheap wine, clinked his glass against mine, and asked me about the 18th century manuscript I was restoring. "You carry yourself like you own the room," Arthur had murmured to me once, his dark eyes studying my face. "Even when they treat you like the floor. How do you do that?" "Dignity is a choice, Arthur," I had replied softly. "They can take away my seat at the table, but they cannot take away my composure." Arthur had smiled, a small, genuine thing. "You're a rare one, Ilara. Julian doesn't know what he has." Arthur was the only reason I survived the Kensington estate. But even his quiet support couldn't protect me from the storm that was brewing. It all culminated on the night of Eleanor's annual winter charity gala. This was the social event of the season in Boston. The Kensington estate was transformed into a glittering wonderland of ice sculptures, imported white orchids, and crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of the city's most powerful politicians, CEOs, and socialites were in attendance. For Eleanor, this was her coronation, the night she proved her dominance over the Boston elite. I knew the evening would be difficult, but I had prepared myself. I had spent a month's salary on a beautiful, understated emerald green gown. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant. I pinned my hair up in a classic twist. I wore no jewelry, save for a simple silver chain, because the only jewelry I actually owned was locked in a reinforced vault in Europe, pieces worth more than the entire Kensington estate combined. When Julian and I arrived at the ballroom, the whispers began almost immediately. Eleanor was holding court near the grand staircase, draped in diamonds. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. I could see the disgust radiating from her. To her, my presence was a stain on her perfect evening. Julian immediately abandoned me. "I need to go network," he muttered, pulling his arm from my grasp. "Just stay out of the way, Alara. Don't embarrass me." He vanished into the sea of tuxedos, leaving me standing alone near a towering ice sculpture. I took a deep breath, smoothing my dress, and walked toward the edge of the room, intending to simply observe. I didn't drink, I didn't mingle, I just stood quietly, maintaining my posture. But Eleanor wasn't content to let me simply exist in the shadows. She wanted me eradicated. Around 10 p.m., the music suddenly stopped. The string quartet lowered their bows. The low hum of conversation faded into an uneasy silence as Eleanor stepped up to the main microphone on the sweeping marble staircase. Her face was flushed, her expression a mask of theatrical distress. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I apologize for the interruption, but it seems we have a thief among us." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "My antique diamond tennis bracelet, a Kensington family heirloom, has gone missing from the master suite upstairs," she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd before locking dead onto me. My stomach plummeted. The room seemed to tilt. "Now," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We are all friends here. We are all family. We are all people of a certain standing. Except for one." The entire ballroom turned to look at me, hundreds of eyes, judging, staring, condemning. The silence was absolute. The weight of their collective gaze felt like physical pressure crushing my chest. Eleanor slowly descended the stairs, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea, until she was standing just a few feet away from me. "Alara," she said loudly, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "I know how difficult things are for you. I know you struggle on your little librarian's salary. And I know you've been incredibly jealous of the life Julian can provide. But stealing from me? In my own home?" "I didn't take your bracelet, Eleanor," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and measured. I refused to let it shake. I refused to let her see me cry. "Don't lie to me, you little tramp," Eleanor snapped, dropping the fake sympathy. "You were seen upstairs. One of the catering staff saw you near my room." "I haven't left this ballroom all night," I replied, my chin held high. "And you know that." I looked desperately through the crowd for Julian. I finally spotted him hiding near the bar. He was looking down at his drink. He wasn't coming to help me. He was letting his mother destroy me in front of the entire city. "Empty your purse," Eleanor demanded. "No," I said quietly. "If you have nothing to hide, you will empty that cheap little bag right now," Eleanor shrieked. Suddenly, a figure stepped between us. It was Arthur. "Mother, that is enough." Arthur said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He turned to the crowd. There is no missing bracelet. I saw it on her dresser 20 minutes ago. This is a pathetic witch hunt. Eleanor's face turned an ugly shade of purple. How dare you speak to me that way in front of my guests, Arthur? You take the side of this gold-digging street trash over your own family? She has more class in her little finger than you have in your entire body, Mother. Arthur fired back, his jaw clenched. The room gasped again. This was the scandal of the decade. Eleanor was shaking with rage. She realized she couldn't prove the theft, not with Arthur contradicting her. But she had the power of the house. She had the ultimate authority. Get out, Eleanor hissed, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at the grand entrance. Get out of my house. You are nothing. You are a parasite. You will never be a Kensington. Julian is done with you. Get out! I looked past Eleanor. I looked directly at Julian. Julian? I asked softly. Are you going to let her do this? Julian finally looked up. His face was pale, his eyes weak. He looked at his mother, then at the hundreds of wealthy peers watching him. He made his choice. Just go, Alara, Julian mumbled, his voice pathetic and thin. Just leave. You're ruining everything. The betrayal was a physical blow. The man I had loved, the man I had given up my anonymity for, was throwing me away because he was afraid of his mother's checkbook. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply nodded. I see, I said. I turned away from Julian. I looked at Eleanor, my expression utterly blank. Then, with the perfect, measured posture of a woman who had been trained to walk gracefully to the guillotine, I turned and walked toward the front doors. The crowd parted for me in dead silence. I could feel Arthur walking right behind me, a silent, protective shield. When I reached the heavy mahogany doors, the butler, looking deeply apologetic, pulled them open. Outside, a massive winter thunderstorm had rolled in off the harbor. The wind was howling, whipping the rain sideways in violent sheets. It was freezing, chaotic, and brutal. I stepped out onto the front porch. The butler, following Eleanor's strict nod, pushed the heavy doors shut behind me. The deadbolt clicked. I was locked out. If you're loving this story so far, don't go anywhere. This is where the story turns. This is where it gets good. Subscribe now. I stood on the massive, covered stone porch, the wind blowing the freezing rain against my emerald dress. The cold seeped into my bones instantly. Behind me, through the massive glass windows of the foyer, I could see Eleanor laughing. She was holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by her friends, toasting to her victory. She had successfully purged the trash from her home. The door suddenly clicked open again, and Arthur slipped out into the storm, carrying a large black umbrella and a heavy wool coat. He wrapped the coat around my shivering shoulders and opened the umbrella, shielding us from the worst of the driving rain. My car is parked around back, Arthur said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I'm taking you home, Alara. I am so deeply, incredibly sorry. I'm done with this family. I'm done with all of it. I looked at Arthur. He was getting soaked, his expensive tuxedo ruined, but he didn't care. He was only focused on keeping me safe. He had seen my worth before he knew anything about me. He had shown up in the most inconvenient, uncomfortable moment, demanding nothing in return. Thank you, Arthur, I said quietly, pulling his warm coat around me. But you don't need to drive me home. Alara, it's freezing. You can't take a cab in this. I won't be taking a cab, I said. I reached into my small clutch purse. I didn't pull out a wallet. I didn't pull out a subway card. I pulled out a heavy matte black satellite phone. Arthur blinked, confused. What is that? A tether, I whispered. I hadn't turned the device on in 3 years. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of what I was about to do. By pressing the power button, the 3-year experiment was over. The ordinary girl, the quiet librarian, the woman who had desperately sought a simple kind of love, would cease to exist. I was stepping back into the cage. But as I looked through the glass at Eleanor's laughing, cruel face, I realized something fundamental. Cruelty thrives in a vacuum of consequences. Eleanor believed she could crush people because she believed her wealth made her untouchable. It was time to introduce her to someone truly untouchable. I turned the phone on. It connected to a secure satellite instantly. I dialed the single pre-programmed number. It rang exactly once. "Directive?" A crisp, authoritative voice answered in fluent Valorian. It was the king's chief of security. I took a deep breath, standing up straighter, the royal posture locking back into my spine. "This is Her Royal Highness, Crown Princess Elara Celestine," I spoke in flawless, commanding Valorian. "Initiate Protocol Alpha 7. I am at the Kensington Estate in Boston. I require immediate extraction, and I want the full convoy." There was a half-second pause on the line before the voice responded, filled with electric urgency. "Understood, Your Highness. We have been tracking your location. The advanced security team is 5 minutes out. The Royal Armada has been holding at Logan Airport for 3 years. We are scrambling the jets and launching the extraction helicopters now. Stand by." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked up at Arthur. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the rain dripping from his hair. "Elara," he breathed. "What language was that? What did you just do?" "I called my father, Arthur," I said gently. "We're going to wait right here." "Wait, Elara, you're freezing." "Arthur, trust me." I reached out and gently touched his arm. "Just wait." We stood on the porch for 5 agonizing minutes. Inside the mansion, the gala was back in full swing. Through the massive glass panes, I could see Eleanor pointing at me outside in the rain, laughing with her friends, mocking my pathetic refusal to walk down the driveway. Julian was nowhere to be seen. And then, the atmosphere began to change. It started as a vibration in the gravel, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to echo underneath the howling wind. Inside the ballroom, the string quartet faltered. The guests stopped talking. Eleanor frowned, looking up at the ceiling. The crystal chandeliers were beginning to violently shake, the glass pendants clinking together in a panicked rhythm. The thumping grew louder, faster. It wasn't thunder. It was the unmistakable, earth-shattering sound of heavy, military-grade rotors tearing through the storm. Suddenly, the night sky above the Kensington estate was flooded with blinding, piercing beams of white light. 2 massive, twin-engine transport helicopters, painted matte black with the golden winged crest of the Valorian royal house emblazoned on their sides, descended through the driving rain, hovering directly over the manicured front lawn. The downdraft from the rotors was apocalyptic. It flattened Eleanor's prized rose bushes and sent patio furniture flying into the pool. Inside the mansion, absolute panic erupted. Guests screamed, spilling champagne, backing away from the windows in terror. Eleanor dropped her glass, her jaw unhinged in shock, staring out at the terrifying display of power descending upon her lawn. But the helicopters were only the vanguard. As the choppers hovered, securing the airspace with searchlights sweeping the grounds, a deafening screech of tires echoed up the long, winding driveway. A fleet of 10 identical, heavily armored black SUVs, flanked by 6 Boston Police Department motorcycles, with their sirens blaring and lights flashing, roared onto the estate. They didn't park politely. They drove straight up onto the pristine lawn, forming a tactical semicircle around the front porch where Arthur and I stood. The doors of the SUVs flew open in unison. Out stepped 24 men and women. But these were not private security guards. These were the elite Royal Guard of Valoria. They were dressed in impeccable, terrifyingly formal uniforms. Dark navy wool coats with heavy gold braiding on the shoulders, crimson sashes, and tactical sidearms strapped to their hips. They moved with absolute, synchronized military precision, ignoring the freezing rain completely. They formed a tight, protective corridor leading from the lead SUV directly to the steps of the porch. The massive oak doors of the mansion were suddenly thrown open from the inside. Eleanor, Julian, and half the gala guests spilled out onto the threshold, completely paralyzed by the spectacle. They had no idea what was happening. They looked like terrified peasants witnessing the arrival of an invading army. Eleanor was trembling. "What is this?" she shrieked over the roar of the helicopters. "Who are you people? I'm calling the police." "The police are already here, ma'am, securing the perimeter," one of the Boston PD officers shouted back, pointing to his motorcycle. "Step back." From the lead SUV, a man stepped out. He was tall, striking, with silver hair at his temples, wearing the Supreme Command uniform of the Valorian military, his chest covered in medals. It was General Vance, my father's most trusted confidant. He didn't even look at Eleanor. He didn't acknowledge the hundreds of wealthy Boston elites staring at him in shock. He walked straight past them, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel, and marched directly up the stairs to where I was standing. When he reached me, he stopped. He looked at my wet hair, my shivering frame, and the cheap dress. A flash of furious anger crossed his eyes, but his military discipline held. Slowly, deliberately, the general dropped to one knee on the wet stone. He bowed his head. "Your Royal Highness," General Vance's voice boomed, amplified by the natural acoustics of the porch, cutting through the sound of the rain and the rotors. "The king sends his regards. We have come to bring you home." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside rested the Laurent signet ring, a massive, flawless sapphire surrounded by diamonds. A piece of jewelry older than the United States itself. He took my cold, shaking hand and slipped the heavy ring onto my finger. The physical weight of the gold grounded me. It was the symbol of my blood, the symbol of my undeniable power. Behind me, the silence from the Kensington family was absolute. It was a suffocating, terrifying vacuum of sound. I slowly turned around to face them. The color had completely drained from Eleanor's face. She looked like a corpse. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound came out. The champagne glass she had been holding was shattered on the floor inside. Julian was leaning against the doorframe, physically clutching his chest, his eyes wide with a terror so profound he looked sick. The hundreds of guests, the mayors, the CEOs, the socialites who had laughed at me 10 minutes ago, were staring at the gold-braided soldiers, the helicopters, and the massive sapphire on my hand, realizing with horrifying clarity that they had just cheered for the public humiliation of European royalty. Elara? Julian stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. "Princess?" I didn't yell. I didn't sneer. My tone was calm, measured, and utterly devastating. "You told me once, Eleanor," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the idling engines, "that I didn't belong in your world, that my blood wasn't good enough for your family." Eleanor took a trembling step forward, her hands raised in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Elara, Your Highness, please, this is a misunderstanding. We didn't know who you were. If we had known—" "That is exactly the point," I interrupted, my voice slicing through her pathetic excuses like a scalpel. "You didn't want to know. You chose cruelty when kindness cost you absolutely nothing. You judged my worth by the price of my shoes and the balance of a bank account you could see. You thought your wealth made you untouchable. I stepped closer to her. She shrank back, terrified of the armed guard standing just inches away. You revealed exactly who you are tonight, Eleanor. Both of you, I said, my eyes flicking to Julian, who flinched under my gaze. You value nothing but surface signals, so let me speak to you in a language you finally understand. I turned to General Vance. General, the Kensington Real Estate Holdings, what is their primary European lender? The Royal Bank of Valoria, Your Highness, the General replied smoothly, not missing a beat. They hold the mortgages on 70% of their commercial properties. Call the Minister of Finance, I commanded, never taking my eyes off Eleanor. Liquidate their accounts. Call in every debt effective at midnight. I want them bankrupted by sunrise. Yes, Your Highness. Eleanor let out a guttural, harrowing sob. She collapsed onto her knees on the wet stone, the muddy water soaking into her diamond-draped gown. No, please, Elara, I beg you. Julian, say something to her. Julian took a step toward me, tears streaming down his face. Elara, baby, please. I love you. We were going to be married. You can't do this. I looked at the man I had spent 3 years with. I felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, clinical emptiness. We were never going to be married, Julian, I said softly, because I was looking for a partner, and you were just a boy hiding behind his mother's skirt. I turned my back on them completely. I had delivered the consequences. I was done. I looked at Arthur. He was still standing there, holding the umbrella, completely shell-shocked. Arthur, I said, my voice softening. My jet is waiting at Logan. There is a lot of room, and Valoria is currently in need of a brilliant architect to redesign the Royal Library. Arthur looked at his mother sobbing on the ground, his brother weeping against the doorframe, and the toxic, shallow world he had always hated. Then he looked at me. A slow, breathtaking smile spread across his face. I've always wanted to see Europe, Arthur said. He tossed the umbrella aside. General Vance opened the door to the lead SUV. I stepped into the warm leather interior, and Arthur climbed in right behind me. The heavy armored door slammed shut, sealing us off from the rain, the Kensingtons, and the lie I had lived for 3 years. As the convoy peeled out of the driveway, tearing up the manicured grass, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence of the estate behind us was the sound of a dynasty crumbling into dust. Trust me, the aftermath is just as satisfying. Let me know in the comments. Would you have bankrupted them, or would you have just walked away? Team Revenge or Team Mercy? 2 years later, the afternoon sun was spilling through the massive, arched, stained-glass windows of the Valorian Royal Library. I stood on the upper balcony, wearing a simple linen dress, no crown, no heavy jewels, just me. Below, the library was entirely transformed. The dark, oppressive shelves of my childhood had been replaced by sweeping, modern arcs of light wood and open space. It was brilliant. It was warm. I felt strong arms wrap around my waist from behind. Arthur kissed the top of my head. The structural supports on the east wing are finished, he murmured, resting his chin on my shoulder. What do you think, Your Highness? I think it's perfect, I smiled, leaning back against his chest. In the 2 years since we left Boston, my life had fundamentally changed. I had returned to my father, not as a broken runaway, but as a woman who finally understood her own power. I took up my duties as the crown princess, but I did it on my own terms. I refused the arranged marriages. I opened the palace gates to the public. And Arthur? Arthur didn't care about the titles. He didn't care about the gold-braided guards or the motorcades. When the cameras flashed, he stepped back and let me shine. But when the doors closed and the weight of the crown felt too heavy, he was exactly the same quiet, grounded man who had sat next to me and poured me cheap wine when the world was trying to make me feel small. We were married in a quiet, private ceremony in the palace gardens 6 months ago. As for the Kensingtons, the consequences of their cruelty were absolute. True to General Vance's word, the royal bank had called in their debts. Without the European leverage, the Kensington real estate empire collapsed like a house of cards. They lost the waterfront estate. They lost the cars. They lost the country club memberships. Last I heard, Eleanor was living in a small, two-bedroom apartment in a less than desirable zip code, ostracized by the very high society friends she had desperately tried to impress at my expense. Julian had taken a mid-level management job at a logistics firm, forced to actually work for a living for the first time in his life. They lost everything, simply because they tied all their value to things that could be taken away. Which brings me to the reason I wanted to share this story with you all today. We live in a world that is obsessed with surface signals. We are taught to judge people by the cars they drive, the titles on their business cards, the brands they wear, and the families they come from. It is so incredibly easy to fall into the trap of believing that your net worth is the same thing as your human worth. But I am telling you, having lived on both extremes of the spectrum, having been the penniless librarian laughed out of a room, and the crown princess who could buy the room with a snap of her fingers, worth exists completely independent of recognition. The people who matter, the true allies in your life, are the ones who see your crown even when you are standing in the freezing rain in a thrift store dress. Arthur saw my worth before the helicopters arrived. He saw it before the ring was placed on my finger. Cruelty always reveals the perpetrator, not the victim. When someone belittles you, when they try to make you feel small to inflate their own ego, they are simply screaming their own insecurities into the void. You do not have to absorb their poison. You do not have to lower yourself to their level. True victory isn't about petty revenge. I didn't bankrupt the Kensingtons to be vindictive. I simply allowed the natural consequences of their toxic financial leverage to crush them. True victory is living beautifully. True victory is surrounding yourself with people who love you for exactly who you are, and walking away from the tables where respect is no longer being served. So to anyone listening to this, who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong, who has ever been underestimated, excluded, or tossed out into the storm, stand tall, keep your dignity, do not let them see you break, because your story isn't over yet. And you never know when your true power is going to land, shake the ground, and change absolutely everything.
Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please leave a comment and make sure you hit that subscribe button. Until next time, remember your worth.